Thank you for joining us, folks. Tonight is February 10th, Monday, and we have some breaking news here on the Nonprofits. This just in, we may have Goliath's actual height and a medical diagnosis for the giant. Taking us through this story is Rob. He's on the scene. Rob?
Yeah, scientists have new archaeological surveys giving us evidence that may give a new and frankly more reasonable height for the biblical giant Goliath. Look, measuring things is really hard. I used to do woodworking, so I can't imagine what measuring things from 1,000 years ago is like and trying to come up with the same measurement 1,000 or thousands of years later. Ultimately, though, I have to ask, does this even matter? This story is from the Daily Mail Online by William Hunter on January 26, 2025.
Well, let's just start there, Rob. Does this matter?
No.
Oh, that was quick. Why not?
because like, why though? So like, in some ways I can, if I were a person who believed deeply in the Bible, then especially if it were inerrant and perfect in every way, then like, I don't need anything to tell me about this anyway, but that's not a good reason to believe anything. But like Noah's Ark, people say that they have found that on like the mountains and stuff like that. And you can find much more easy archaeological evidence for that sort of thing. Like we found the burial grounds, the tombs of various pharaohs through archaeological research. Like we can find those things, but those are more significant discoveries as opposed to like, there was a dude who was big, and then he died somewhere. He may not have been like preserved or given a sacred burial site. So can we even find it in the first place? So like, it's going to be hard to find if it's even possible to find. And if we do find it, what are we going to find out? He's big? Like whatever.
Well, yeah, you're right. So I think the author of this article did present some reasons why this story was designed theoretically the way it was, if it was kind of a made up literary device, if you will. But before we move on to that, I do want to talk about the gigantism. The author calls it giantism. I think the correct term is gigantism. In any case, I want to ask Helen, Helen, what does the research on gigantism or the diagnosis do for the case of the Goliath, if anything?
Well, I think what I found interesting about this, like the biblical story, fine, like whatever. But I can understand, like with this particular thing about gigantism, that it existed and we have mentions of giants in the Bible. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that the ancient Israelites didn't understand, like, you know, an overactive thyroid that causes excessive growth, didn't understand that it causes a lot of other additional medical problems for being as big as these people were. So the fact that this article kind of went into those issues, I found very interesting, like even how they measured, because again, as Rob said in his intro about going, how do we know what the process was, you know, over 2,000 years ago versus, you know, how, I mean, like we have different measuring systems now. So I thought that was really interesting. Not so much like you know, the faith shit, fine. But I thought that also if, you know, to these ancient Israelites, like let's just say, okay, that David killed Goliath with a slingshot. And, you know, you have this average height man, like let's say he's like 5'8" versus someone that might be, you know, as like 7 feet tall or whatever. That to an ancient Israelite that didn't understand like how, you know, this particular medical condition emerged would seem, you know, extraordinary.
Yeah.
And even though we understand the medical condition, like this medical condition is very rare. So even to us that, you know, when I see someone that's like really, really fucking tall, you know, I'm kind of like, wow. So,
yeah, the author alludes to the fact that back in these times in the Middle East, the average sized person was about 5'3", which is consistent with Egypt and other areas. So seeing somebody that's even like 6'5", which is still big by standards today, probably was even bigger back then. But there's a lot going on in this article where we're not just talking about his height and his size, which I think by the standard account is like 9 feet, right? And everybody was scared shitless of Goliath. He wasn't just out there one day. There was like 40 days straight that he was coming out every morning and terrorizing the Israelites and being like, hey, who's going to come fight me? But I want to ask AJ, given the conditions, so the author lays out some conditions consistent with gigantism that would have afflicted Goliath. Does it make sense that Goliath would have been chosen to fight at all?
Well, here's the thing. Goliath was supposed to be a Philistine, which is like the sons of the Nephilims and the humans. The Nephilims were supposed to be these giants that came from heaven, according to the Bible. And so the Philistines were their sons, their children, and they were supposed to be very large. So according to the story, Goliath wasn't necessarily much bigger than all of his family or other people of the city of Gath, where they lived, where they resided. But they were big to the people that did not live there. So as Helen mentioned, when people have gigantism, it can be due to issues with the pituitary gland. Okay, it can be a tumor, or it can be just like an overproduction of growth hormone. And these giants, because of that, because the growth hormone doesn't stop producing, they can develop. So they can develop, their body can become so big that they can develop all these severe health issues, like it can affect their vision, it can affect their blood flow, because humans are not meant to be that size. And when we're talking about gigantism, we're talking about a medical condition that exists even today. So these are facts. Another thing it can cause is their heart to pump blood so hard that it causes heart disease. And most people with gigantism die like around their 20s or 30s due to heart condition. And in the case of Goliath, like you asked, would he have been chosen? Maybe right. He's a little bit larger than his siblings or other people in the city. So maybe that's why he was chosen. But I found interesting that one of the descriptions of the Bible says that he came out to meet David with someone in front of him holding a shield, like a shield bearer. And it makes you wonder, like, did they know that he had some type of health issues? So, like, why?
Yeah, so that's a good segue, because now we're starting to get into, without any proof of what's happening, without a body, right? Maybe we can come up with a motive. Why all of these details in the story? And we start picking them apart and trying to create a story when really, Rob, I think to your point, when you say it doesn't matter, right? Who cares? Or something along those lines. It's not important. I want to try and look at a different side of things. So let's forget about the characteristics of Goliath and let's talk about maybe the underlying story that we're not talking about. What are some of the literary devices at play? Maybe what are some of the agendas that are being represented? What are your thoughts on some of the alternative theories that the author lays out?
So his gigantism, the stature of him, the size of him, in the article they say it's probably a literary device, and I think that's just obviously true, or at least obviously true. There, I don't know if you ever remember Shiloh, the reading dog TV show, but they covered David and the Goliath in one of their episodes. And at the end of each episode, they would always be like, do little bloopers. And in this one, it was like, sound effects are really important for TV shows. Watch what happens when Goliath comes out, stomping out, but there's no sound effects. So they show him and he comes out and there's no sound effects. It's like, oh, he doesn't like make the ground shake. So how a story is told very much informs how the story is received. It also very much informs the message of the story. So, of course, little old David has God's grace on his side, and he beats the biggest guy in town. That's the effect of the story. So his size, in many ways, is not relevant, except for he's big.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, there's so many other characteristics, though, or conditions in this region that I think need to be talked about as well. So the Israelites, we see, unfortunately, today, the Jewish people and the descendants of the Canaanites in general still fighting over land. Back then, it was no different. They were fighting over land. I think that if I understand it correctly, the Canaanites were enemies with the Philistines, but actually were dominated by the Philistines earlier in their past, right? And then this battle takes place. Now, the author points out that the measurement of Goliath is actually consistent with the walls of the city of Gath, where Goliath was from, right? So is there not another kind of metaphor happening where David beating Goliath is really the Israelites sacking the Philistines on their home territory and taking their land? I mean, I feel like that's a more plausible argument given what we know about the Bible and just the way things are taken out of context. I don't know, Helen, what's a more plausible argument, or what is your take on these arguments being presented?
So, because we know that the Bible's written a lot in metaphor, that's the realm that it exists in. There's a lot of conjecture that we can make when we're reading this text. Regardless or not of if Goliath was 9 feet tall or was the same height as the fucking walls, like, we can make that conjecture. He might have if we can, let's just say, okay, that, David's 5'3" and Goliath is 7 feet tall. If he is that tall, or even 6'5", that is such a height difference that it seems extraordinary. And also, if he's from an opposing city and, and where they're kind of combining all these sort of conjectures and ideas together, we can, the inference would be through the metaphor that they're talking about, actually taking the walls down and invading the city rather than talking about a man. Or they're talking about a literal man that came from the city and, combining the two together, because religion does that as well. So, but without actual evidence of someone from this city that was 9 feet tall, it is just conjecture. It can be a metaphor, it could be a man, or it can be a little bit of both, but there's no way to actually test for it. So a lot, and the article kind of alludes to that. So I'm not I think it's interesting. I love learning about biblical past, through a historical and scientific lens. I love that shit.
Yeah.
But as far as the way the story is told, I'm not putting all my eggs in either basket. It's kind of a distribution.
Yeah. I think to Rob's point, we probably don't get much from this. It's pretty insignificant. But, AJ, I thought that you had. Go ahead, Rob. Go ahead. I'm going to kick it to AJ, but I did mention you. Go ahead. Real quick.
Well, that's
I'll
why
add my part later.
That's why I said to me the biblical part sounded interesting, because like I said earlier, I think Helen mentioned that there's just they measured things in different ways.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put a pin in that new thing. Most people for most of history are illiterate, and most people, when they engage with a book, has been audibly. Even the people when could read. There's a reason why Shakespeare is in iambic pentameter, because it's easier to memorize if it's structured, and that's how epic poems work as well, like the Iliad and the Odyssey. So I didn't think about it's a metaphor if he is the size of the city's wall and he has destroyed him, therefore he's destroyed the city wall. That's cute. But it's also just a really good memory tool of orally passing this tradition of, do you see that wall? He was that big.
Wow. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's a really good analysis. Yeah, that's a really good analysis. And yeah, I mean, this is the time before the Bible was really being written down. Everything's an oral history. AJ, I know you have a point, but I want to ask you a question, and then you just feel free to take it. So you brought up a good point. leading up to this, talking about David was asking the man standing near the site of the battle, what happens to the person that kills Goliath? And basically the response was, oh, they get all these rewards. And you kind of pointed towards selfishness. So maybe there's something else going on that we haven't covered yet in this story. And go ahead, the floor is yours.
Yeah, no, that was exactly my point that I was about to cover. Okay, like because I was thinking like the story is supposed to lead to David becoming king and all of that. Like King David is like a main huge part of the Bible, right? So they have to make him look good. They have to make him look like the winner, like he beat up this gigantic, massive, opponent. But they make him look like he was this selfless servant of God. But was he, or was he just selfish? Because David asks the men that are near him, he's like, well, what is going to happen if you, as you asked, like, what is going to happen to whoever kills this Philistine and removes him from Israel? Like, funny enough, he calls Goliath uncircumcised Philistine. I don't know why he goes there, but he goes there. So then he asked several other people, like, what is the reward going to be? What am I going to get? If I beat him up, like, I don't want to do this if I'm not going to get anything. And apparently the price was getting wealth from King Saul. He was not going to pay taxes, and he was going to get one of Saul's daughter's hands in marriage. So he was also going to be able
the daughter was totally okay with that.
Oh, yeah. He probably like, hey, just pick whichever you want, like. And then apparently,
I want to know how David knew the state of Goliath's penis. Like, that's what I want to know.
I want to know. I mean, there's so much to talk about. I'm sorry, AJ. I will let you finish. But what I want to know is why David, the shepherd, came to bring bread into the village and automatically got an audience with the king. Like, this happens more than once in the Bible. Like, how many times do people bring bread into a city, like, meet even the mayor? This is just crazy. But go ahead, AJ, please.
Yeah, like his brothers were also calling him conceited and wicked. They were like, "You're just coming over here to watch the fight." Like, it's a really, really weird story.
Yeah.
It makes you also wonder, why did King Saul believe David, literally a child? Like, David goes and he's like, well, I can kill him because I killed a lion that attacked my father's sheep, and then I killed the bear doing the same. Like, it was just a claim, a claim. Like,
and the loser becomes the subject of the other. So let me take this kid that I've never met, that lives in the woods, that is a shepherd, that showed up with a rock and a sling. Yeah, I will bet my kingdom on this. I think this is probably just a way of aggrandizing the Israelites, right? And it's legend, it's myth, it's and making others look stupid, look weak, even if the gigantism diagnosis is correct. And Goliath was actually, like, not only just massive, but couldn't see very well and was probably weak and had bad blood circulation. I don't know.
Hey, man, I'm just going to say, in modern America, we have Paul Bunyan and they have Goliath, okay? It's just like, we got folk tales.
Paul Bunyan was, yeah, that's true. But Paul Bunyan, I don't remember the story of Paul Bunyan. I don't believe he was defeated by anybody, was he? I mean,
he just planted all the trees across America, Jimmy. That's how that worked.
That was Johnny Appleseed.
And for the Israelites, it's like, we may look weak, we may look insignificant, but we are great, and this is how we are. Look at this great nation that collapsed. They do the same thing with the Egyptians in the Bible as well. Abraham shows up to Egypt and they're like, hey, want to meet the Pharaoh? Like, yeah, because you're so great, you could just go meet the Pharaoh. So I guess, Helen, I want to turn back to you. We covered a lot here. We've got medical diagnoses, we've got literary devices. Does any of this help us in any way, or is this just kind of a fun conversation?
I think this is just me. For people that think the Bible's inerrant, that this might be like a thought experiment for you. Like, let's just, because of the things that he brought up about history and about, like, you know, what people's perspectives of certain medical conditions in the past might have been, that inflating, you know, things out of, you know, making the ordinary extraordinary, that I'm hoping, you know, the people that, you know, take the Bible as inerrant will just give them a moment to think. Because, like, to me, I'm like, okay, that's cool. It's an interesting conversation that we're having right now. But I'm hoping that, you know, for, you know, the average person that is a believer, that it will just give them a moment to go, you know, and just maybe a little bit of skepticism will enter their brain.
Well, we know what that conversation usually looks like. You know, you just can't question God's plan. Rob, I'll go to you, and then AJ will close out with you. I'd like to know, you know, what's the moral of the story here? What are we walking away with now?
I would honestly just treat it as a folktale, and I think that is the best way to do it. In fact, to me, for fun fact, I think the most believable part of the story is that he did kill him with a sling, because I don't know if you've ever seen expert slingers, but in Bronze Age technology, that stuff is like gnarly and wicked. It will destroy you. So, like, it doesn't matter how big you are. The dude got clocked in the head by a rock going almost Mach 1. Yeah, he died.
Yeah.
Okay, but also another fun fact to what Rob just said, the fact that he got hit in the head, it makes sense if he had gigantism, because the pituitary gland is like right here, like right behind, in between your eyes. So he could have got hit there and, you know, died. Yeah. So it makes sense.
You know what? The thing that makes sense to me the most, I think, is the fact that if there was a real battle, which archaeology seems to suggest just by digging up a bunch of arrowheads and bodies, I think. But, you know, if there was a real battle and the Israelites won, they got lucky. They beat, you know, a pretty formidable army. And they said, we got to tell a tale about this, like, as soon as possible. We got to push this out to everybody. And, you know, on another fun note, David didn't only kill him with the rock. He went and took Goliath's sword and then cut his head off. And that was the fatal blow. So Goliath may very well still could have been alive. In any case, folks, thank you for joining us as we dissect one of the many weird and, I don't know, messy, hard to understand stories of the inerrant word of God, the Bible. And if you want to see more, click on one of the links below and stay tuned to the nonprofits.